welcome to another episode of Can't Make This Up. I'm your host, Kevin. Today, I have a fun episode for you. Today, we're looking into the history of UFOs, the government's interest in investigating UFOs, and the emerging culture of ufology that has emerged around this idea. My guest today is Sarah Scoles. She is a science writer, and she has published works in numerous publications, such as Wired, Popular Science, Scientific American. And we are going to talk with her about her book, They Are Already Here, UFO Culture and Why We See Saucers. So I think you're going to learn quite a bit today. Before we get started, I want to offer a shout out to a new supporter of the podcast on Patreon. Thank you very much to Bethany for offering her support of the podcast. If you are interested in helping support what I do here at CMTU, head on over to patreon.com for as little as $1 a month. You can help out and help cover some of the costs of producing the show. And then you also get to take advantage of early episodes that come out about a week early, asking guests questions before they come on, and getting access to some bonus Q&A content. For example, with this episode, Sarah and I talk a little bit extra about to what extent is ufology becoming a religion in the United States. And she had some very interesting things to say about that. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, give it a rate, give it a like, give it a review, and then go ahead and follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear any suggestions you might have or any thoughts about the show. Those things are always welcome. And book recommendations. I'm always trying to find new guests to bring on. So if there's a history book that you've really been into lately, and it's been published in the last couple of years, drop me a line. I would love to hear about it, and I'd love to maybe talk to the author. All right, so let's dive into my interview with Sarah Scoles.
The You Can't Make This Up History Podcast, bringing you strange but true things from the past. It's not the average history that you learned in school. We're bringing you the heroes and bringing you the fools, and stories that are just too crazy to believe. The stranger than fiction and super unique.
Sarah Scoles, welcome to Can't Make This Up.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Very glad to have you here. We're going to talk about something we don't normally talk about on History Podcast. We're going to talk about UFOs.
Yeah, I mean they have a pretty substantial history, so it fits even if it's weird, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been around long enough that they can be considered a part of our history. Before we get started, though, tell us a little bit about you. You're a science writer, I understand.
Yeah, I started out my career planning to go be an astronomer and work at a radio telescope, and then I discovered that I enjoyed not so much the deep dive into a specific scientific topic, but being able to learn about and share stuff about lots of different topics. So I write science news and articles and things like that, and sometimes stuff about UFOs for a general audience for my job. And yeah, that's where I come from.
So it sounds like I'm talking to a fellow science nerd.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, it's a good way to be. You get to learn a lot about the way the world works and all the things that we also don't know about the way the world works. So it's kind of ideal in my opinion.
Absolutely. All right. So you are the author of They Are Already Here. And this is a book about a little bit of the history of the UFO and a little bit of the culture of people who believe in them. I think a lot of people would argue that this isn't particularly a hard scientific topic So how did you first become interested in looking into UFOs?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, for most of my life, I wasn't interested in them at all because I do kind of I come from the hard science side of things, and I agree with you that UFOs, if they're involved science at all, are pretty soft science, at least at the moment. And so, you know, I'd spent a lot of my life interested in things like astrobiology or the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, these kind of more quantifiable and data-driven things. But UFOs I had just kind of relegated to, you know, that's for other people. And then in late 2017, maybe some of your listeners remember when this happened, the New York Times published a big story on the front page of one issue about a Pentagon-led research program into UFOs. And I thought, well, on the one hand, it makes sense that the people who are trying to monitor and protect the airspace around the country are interested in things they can't identify. On the other hand, a lot of this stuff sounds really creepy and a little suspicious, so maybe I'll start to look into it. And then it was actually in the course of looking into that, talking to people like historians about the way that UFOs have shown up in the past, you know, 70 years or whatever, that made me realize actually there are people who do study this and think about it in a really interesting way, and I just kind of set off to learn more about them.
Okay, so that New York Times article that kind of set you off on this quest. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What did it, you know, what did they claim in this article?
Mm-hmm. So the article introduced us to a man named Luis Elizondo. He said, who said that from around 2008 to 2012, he led a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which he said would take UFO reports, or, you know, in polite terms these days, unidentified aerial phenomena, and from service members in the military, and investigate them. And he said that, you know, if there was a UFO report that came in from some part of the Department of Defense, it landed on his desk. And with the article came a couple of videos showing alleged military encounters with UFOs. And then it described the contractor who was in charge of actually running this program. Its acronym is called ATIP, is what people say. And that man's name is Robert Bigelow. He made a lot of money building budget hotels in Las Vegas, and then started some space companies, and then apparently became in charge of the Pentagon's UFO program. So the article claimed, I guess, to make a long story shorter in bullet points, that the Pentagon was investigating UFOs, Robert Bigelow's company was in charge of it, that people in the Department of Defense saw them kind of on the regular, and also that it was a national security problem that needed to be investigated, and that people were coming out of the shadows of government, out of the hidden corners of the Pentagon, to talk about this publicly because they didn't think it was being taken seriously enough. And that is how this New York Times article got started, so they say.
Okay, and that's kind of what led us on the track to where we are today, because just recently, within the last few weeks of when we're recording this, the U.S. Congress had public hearings on this topic of unidentified aerial phenomena.
Yeah, that is true. It has been kind of a slow burn since that initial article, which was now, you know, 4.5 years ago, to today, where people, you know, at the beginning, people came out of government, said this is a problem, it's not being taken seriously, and then, as I understand it, have kind of lobbied through the past few years to get more data public, to have more politicians take the issue seriously, and to have some kind of formalized investigation program. So that is where we are. And actually just yesterday, NASA, the space agency, announced that they too are jumping on the UFO train and are going to be investigating which of their data sources might be useful to the effort. So it's kind of coming to some sort of a head, I suppose.
Okay, all right.
Mhm.
Well, we talked about the hard science versus, soft science separation there. I would like to think that NASA will approach this with a hard science mindset.
Yeah, that is what they promised at their press conference. And I mean, there are certainly unscientific, pseudoscientific, and very soft scientific ways to go about studying UFOs. But if what you're doing is looking at, satellite data, radar data, things like that, and just saying, is there something in here we don't recognize? How often do we see something in here we don't recognize? What are the characteristics? Do different instances have characteristics in common? Like that can actually be, at least statistically, scientific. So I think hopefully at least that's their aim.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, regardless of if, UFOs are real or extraterrestrial or just some kind of misidentified natural phenomena, regardless, people believe in them, which is interesting in and of itself. And one thing I really liked about reading your book is you go out and you meet some of these people. So can you tell us a little bit about your experiences, going and meeting with UFO researchers and going to UFO conferences? I think a lot of people probably have this stereotype of, somebody who sits in their basement and wears a tinfoil hat.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I mean that guy's out there. I didn't talk to him, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the first people who I interacted with on this UFO journey is a guy named Jack Brewer, and he writes a blog called the UFO Trail, where he's very interested in UFOs, but kind of from the historical and human vantage point. To my knowledge, he hasn't had a sighting and has no kind of like spiritual attachment to UFOs, but he goes out and does kind of like hobby investigative reporting on people like Robert Bigelow, who ran this Pentagon program. And so people like him are interesting to me because they dedicate a lot of free time to investigating UFOs, despite not really, believing they're one thing or the other. And I think that's a subset of people who just like a hard problem, like a mystery that can't be solved and have no particular investment in what the answer itself is. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum are people like Katie Grabowski, who is someone I met in Colorado, where I live, and she is an investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. And MUFON is where, like, if you saw a UFO tomorrow and you wanted to report it and have somebody go investigate it and see if they could figure out what it was, MUFON does that, and Katie is one of Colorado's lead investigators, and she
and this is all volunteer, right? People just who enjoy doing it.
Right. And yes, and MUFON is far from a perfect organization, but it does have a lot of honest and good people volunteering for it. But yeah, she was motivated by strange kind of experiences that she interpreted as paranormal when she was younger, and then like watching ghost hunting shows as she got older, and then seeing strange things and wanting to investigate them. So she does believe things happen, but also tries to remain a little bit agnostic about what's going on. And so I think on either side of the spectrum, it becomes pretty personal, even if you don't believe or not. Just people go down the rabbit hole and become obsessed for one reason or the other. And so, I mean, so did I, to be fair.
There's something about this topic that's like that. It kind of has a addictive quality to it to some degree. Because I've noticed that in just, getting curious about it and listening to some podcasts. It's very easy to start kind of binge consuming this type of content.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think that, first of all, there's just so many different avenues to go down. You could spend all your time investigating individual cases that you find. You could spend all your time trying to figure out whether there's a government conspiracy going on. You could spend all your time like disentangling the financial web among the different UFO celebrities. And so there's kind of endless avenues for exploration. But I think technically, I guess I can only speak for myself. And there's probably a little bit of hubris in thinking like, here's this thing, these UFOs, they've existed as a mystery, whether they're real or alien or not, for decades. But maybe if I do just enough research, can finally be the one to find some kind of definitive answer. And because, no one else really has before, you can always maybe imagine that you might be that person. And I wasn't, but maybe you are, Kevin.
I'm going to solve the entire mystery.
Thank you. A lot of people would really appreciate that from you. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. There's that quest for the esoteric that have the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, before we talk a little bit more about the current or recent government programs, so ATIP isn't the government's first foray into this topic. The government has officially studied UFOs before, right?
Yes. Yeah, there was a series of projects kind of in the mid 20th century that all kind of bled into each other. And the biggest one, and the one that people have probably heard of, if they've heard of any of them, is called Project Blue Book, which ran for a few decades and was essentially a lot like people described ATIP. Let's take these reports of UFOs, let's set some scientists upon them, and let's see if we can solve what they are. And so they had, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but many cases that they would go investigate. And the goal, it was a military project, and so the goal wasn't find aliens or solve a spiritual mystery. It was determine whether UFOs represent some kind of threat to national security. And in the end, it was determined that they did not, and also that studying them didn't really provide very much scientific value to the community. And so the project was canceled. And as far as anyone knew from then, which was about 1969, until we learned about ATIP, there was not an official, named investigation program. But ATIP, I guess you could kind of think of the way they described it as a modern reincarnation of Project Blue Book. And, we might get into a little bit of whether that was actually true or not, but that's the way it was described.
Now, just thinking, historically about when the Air Force's research efforts were situated. That's at the height of the Cold War. What factors did that play into their program?
Yeah, I think if you want to get psychological about it, there was a large fear of outsiders and kind of a constant awareness and watching of the skies, like what is the Soviet Union sending over, who is trying to, take away our way of life. And just it, people were on edge. And I think the way I have heard it described from people who have studied it much more than me is, when there are times of worldly, very terrestrial turmoil, people kind of turn their attention to UFOs, in part because it's something you can worry about, that is a distraction from the very present thing that you should maybe worry about more, like is Russia sending a bomb this way, or something like that. And that's from the public side, but from the actual governmental and military side, investigating unidentified things over U.S. airspace is a very good way to find out if there are incursions or trespassings that you are not okay with, and whether another country is developing some kind of stealth aircraft that you don't know of yet. And if I go outside and I see something I can't identify and I report it, that doesn't mean that the US government doesn't know that it's some kind of new drone from some other country. And the same would have been true then. So it was a useful way to see other people's technology, and also to see the way that the US's own technology looked to a regular person. People dispute this statistic, but I think the official one that's out there is that the CIA takes credit for about 50% of UFO sightings around that time because of its U-2 spy plane. They say that around 50% of them were just people seeing that. And so you can believe that if you want, or not believe that if you want, but I think it is at least a factor going into things.
And that's good information to have, right? If everybody can see your spy plane, you may want to rethink.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Bad job. Try again. Yeah.
Okay. And that's I guess that's kind of the similar arguments that came up in the congressional hearing and that you hear today, that there's some strange sightings around in restricted airspace or around naval exercises, and aliens aside, that's a concern.
Right. And I think I'm not a believer that aliens are driving spaceships around, or that we should spend a lot of resources investigating that hypothesis in particular. But I do think that the people charged with assessing and protecting a country would do well to understand strange unidentified things flying around, no matter where they come from. So it makes sense to me that is something that they would want to investigate.
Yeah, I agree.
Even if it's just some guy driving the drone that he got for Christmas.
Right. I think about this, it could be commercial drone, something somebody got from Amazon, but I feel like if I took a commercial drone and flew it around an aircraft carrier or a nuclear power plant, I'm going to go to jail.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it very much. Yeah, and I think the nuclear sites, or at least the Department of Energy National Labs, where they develop nuclear weapons technology, I think they're all getting counter drone systems, or at least some of them have already, because they have been having problems with people flying them around, and so they're all getting shoot down your drone systems.
So if you don't want to lose your drone, don't do that.
Exactly. Don't learn the lesson the hard way.
Hey guys, Kevin here. I wanted to share with you a new development with the podcast. It is coming to you from a new podcast hosting service, Anchor.fm. So far, I'm really impressed. I really like it. Number one, it's free, which is always great. It's also integrated with Spotify and offers some great analytics on who's listening. Helps me gain some insight into what content would be good for the audience. And you can also record from your phone, which is a nice new feature that I'm using right now. So if you have a podcast or you're interested in starting one, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Okay. So, we studied this pretty extensively in the 50s and 60s, and then it seems to have gone away, but then is resurrected with this ATIP program. But can you tell me, so the name of the podcast is Can't Make This Up. Can you tell me what the hell Blink-182 has to do with any of this?
Oh man. Oh, well, yes. So where do you even start? So Tom DeLonge was a member of the band Blink-182, which I listened to a lot of when I was a teenager.
Yep, me too.
And a few years ago, he started talking pretty publicly about how he had some insider information about UFOs and what was going on. And he'd kind of long expressed interest in this in interviews, and his bandmates would talk about him like reading a bunch of UFO conspiracy books on the tour bus when they were out. But in 2017, October 2017, he announced a new initiative called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, which is not very catchy, but is an organization that he formed allegedly to help get UFO information that he had in his possession out to the public in palatable ways through like, hardcore reports on things that had happened, particularly within the military, but then also through, books, movies, films, things like that, that could just kind of inject his version of UFO history into people's minds. And at his announcement of this initiative, he introduced the world to the man who says he ran the Pentagon's addictive program and revealed the existence of this program for the first time, although he didn't name it. So he had hooked up with this guy from the Pentagon. They were going to bring the world a bunch of UFO truth, and they had possession of a couple of videos from fighter jets that allegedly showed UFOs. And so, since then, Tom
DeLonge, the
famous
ones that we've all probably seen at this point, repeated on the news.
Yeah, and you've all seen them because there's not a whole lot of others, so they just keep showing the same ones over and over again.
Yes.
But yeah, since then, Tom DeLonge and this crew that he brought together for this program has kind of been behind most of the news stories that people have probably read about UFOs since 2017. Like, they're the ones who have these videos. They're the ones who push forward different stories, and actually they say that they are the ones who have also been lobbying Congress people to be taking it seriously. So we all have Blink-182 to thank for a lot of things these days, I guess.
That's just a crazy story to think.
I know. I remember reading before Tom announced any of the To the Star stuff, and he was just talking about how much he knew about aliens. I was like, man, wouldn't it be so weird if Tom DeLonge was the one to like change the world with alien knowledge? I don't know if I would like that or hate that, but it would definitely be very weird.
Well, and you talked earlier about, people wanting to be that person that brings this truth to the world. And I think that definitely describes him in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, no one fully knows Tom DeLonge's motives except for Tom DeLonge, but I think it's clear that he, at the very least, is like true and sincere believer in what he calls the phenomenon itself, and does believe that he's bringing some truth to the world. A lot of people disagree with that, but I think he believes it.
Okay, so him and a few others have been really influential in bringing awareness to this topic and getting congressional interest. But this more recent government research program, I think when we say that, people think of this very, like classified agents or military personnel all handling these things in the Pentagon. But the way you describe it in your book, the reality is a little bit different in how this got outsourced to, I guess I'll say, an eccentric billionaire.
Yes, I think that would be fair to say. Yeah, Robert Bigelow, he lives out near Las Vegas, and his grandparents had a UFO sighting and told him about it when he was young. And that's kind of, at least how the origin story is told, of how he got very interested in all this. And so he's been interested in UFOs for a long time. He's also interested in other sorts of paranormal topics. In the 1990s, he bought a piece of ranch land in Utah called Skinwalker Ranch, which you might know from the hyped up History Channel show Skinwalker Ranch, where allegedly there were like supernatural wolves and cattle mutilations. And sorry, go ahead.
I've seen that. Yes.
Yeah. And so he bought it. He wanted to be the guy to gather scientific data on weird phenomena. And so he established a whole research institute to check out the paranormal things that were allegedly going on in this ranch. And, inconveniently, the cameras would shut off right when the wolf showed up or whatever. And so they never actually gathered any data. But he was also the go-to guy. His company was the go-to company for UFO sightings for a long time. And so just kind of in the background, he's been funding private UFO studies and gathering reports and trying to investigate them. And then, around 2008, he became the person in charge of doing things like that for our government instead of for his own interest.
So we, as you and I, as taxpayers and people listening, we helped look for portals and werewolves and weird stuff at a ranch in Utah.
Well, it's still a little bit unclear exactly what did go on under the umbrella of this program, because the only things that the Pentagon has actually released that have come out of this program are a bunch of technical reports about advanced flight technology, because on paper this program was not actually about UFOs at all, according to the contract and according to the Pentagon itself. It was for Robert Bigelow to be investigating advanced weapons systems that exist now and of the future, and to kind of extrapolate out, like, what should we be worried about in terms of weapons and flying weapons in the future. And the Pentagon says, as part of that, the group maybe used UFO reports to understand some strange things in the sky, but that studying UFOs was not actually part of the mandate at all. But then other people have said, that was just a cover. He was supposed to be studying UFOs, and other people have said he was supposed to be studying UFOs, but what he was doing was studying werewolves on a ranch in Utah. And so as a taxpayer, what is not a whole lot exactly about what happened to your money.
I mean, they spend money on all kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, if they can catch the wolf, I would be super interested in that, but
I would pay admission to go see it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so this all kind of became public knowledge in 2017. Have in the last 4.5, almost 5 years, I guess, has the public learned any more? Have they made any progress toward, I guess, what the UFO community would call disclosure?
You use the D word.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there has been kind of a lot that's happened on the political scene. Places like the Navy have tried to formalize UFO reporting guidelines. The there's a military UAP task force that formed. We got a report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, kind of looking at the UFO sightings that they had data on and trying to figure out, what they could tell about them. But in terms of actual new evidence or things you can kind of sink your teeth into as a person without a security clearance, there's not a whole lot really that report from the spy agency kind of basically said, like, here's I forget how many, 140 something incidents that we have found over this set of years, and in only one case could we determine what something was, but we think the rest of these, there's just not enough data to tell whether it's truly something extraordinary and weird or whether it's just something that's misidentified. And that is what a noted skeptic named Mick West calls the low information zone, where if you just don't have a lot of information about something, there's no way to turn it from a UFO into an IFO, an identified flying object, because you just don't have enough data to do that. And then there have been like a few more videos that have come out of UFOs. Some of them have been debunked as pretty prosaic objects, and it's mostly been kind of a rehashing of the same things we already knew in 2017, but with a lot more senators involved. So I would say half a step forward for UFO information.
So I guess if you're a skeptic to begin with, you look at this and say, well, there's nothing there. That's why they don't have much information to share. And I guess if you're more conspiratorially minded, you look at this as a government cover up, and they're trying to keep the goods. Right.
Definitely. Yeah. And there's kind of no way, if you're outside of government, to prove that wrong. It's unfalsifiable, which means if you believe that, you can just keep believing it. And there is historical precedent for that kind of being true. Not the government hiding aliens, but like in the past, it hasn't wanted people to really get into UFOs, and has been concerned about it and has kept information from people. So to think that they might be doing the same thing now does have historical basis.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I guess lastly, the other part of your book that I really enjoyed is it's kind of part travelogue, where you kind of go on these UFO themed trips and adventures to see things for yourself. Can you kind of briefly tell us some of the places you went?
Yeah, one of my favorite trips was going camping outside of Area 51, which is, the advanced testing base, or where they keep the aliens in the basement, depending on who you ask. And it's just a vast place in the Nevada desert that you could go right up to the border of. You're allowed, because it's just all public land, but as soon as you cross the border, they can shoot you if they would like to. So I didn't do that. Camping there where people think that they have seen a lot of UFOs. When I was camping, I did see things that were UFOs to me. Like I saw this kind of like fleet of what I assume were probably drones that just like moved in unison in this huge net over the sky and then just completely disappeared. And so going there made me understand why, if you already believed that the US government was in possession of alien spacecraft, that you would look at that and think like, that's definitely an alien spacecraft. It's not what I think, but and then one of my other favorite places was called the UFO Watchtower, which is just a little tourist attraction in my home state of Colorado, where a woman who kind of tried and financially failed to be a cattle rancher decided to build a little watchtower where people could look for UFOs and stay overnight camping and like leave mementos in a kind of spiritual garden for the aliens to interact with somehow. And it gets a mix of people who are kind of casually interested in UFOs, people who see it as like a UFO and alien shrine, and it's just kind of like a gathering place where a lot of people from a lot of different viewpoints can come and sit around a literal campfire. I think those are my two favorites.
That's kind of cool. And I could see if you were a member of the UFO community, this would be kind of a bucket list stop for you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a cool part of the country. Also, it's a very weird part of the country, and it's in a valley, which I guess I should have mentioned, that has, at least according to some lists, one of the highest per capita UFO sighting rate in the country, which is why she decided to build this tower. So.
Okay. And you've Sarah, you've studied this extensively. You've written a book on it. I guess the audience is probably waiting to wonder, what's your take on ET? Have we been visited?
There's actually an alien sitting next to me right now as we speak. You just can't see him because this is a podcast. No, I think that it is highly unlikely and a pretty large logical leap based on the evidence we have to come firmly down on the side that UFOs are built and driven by aliens. That said, I haven't seen one. I don't know. So I can't say that for sure, but I think it's unlikely. But in the universe, as a whole, I kind of go back and forth. I think a lot of astronomer types are pretty optimistic about the fact that there's so many stars that have so many planets and so many different conditions where life could develop, that there kind of just statistically has to be life in the universe. And if there's life, likely some of it kind of went on to develop intelligence of some sort. But then if you talk to biologists, I think they tend to be a little bit less optimistic, because it turns out we still don't really understand how you get from a bunch of unalive chemicals to life at all. And so we don't understand how rare of a process that might be. And so, I think probably on my optimistic good mood days, I think there's aliens out there. And on my nihilistic days, I think, nah. So I don't come down firmly on either side. What about you? What do you think?
I consider myself, and I can't take credit for this, I stole it from somewhere, I don't remember where. I'm an optimistic disbeliever.
Uh-huh.
I want this to be true. I grew up watching enough Star Trek where I think that would be, just amazing to have this galactic federation and contact with these other species. But every time, new supposed evidence is presented, I'm always disappointed. That's all you got?
This fuzzy video.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm with you. Based on what we're learning about the universe and how common planets are, and how Earth may not be as unique as we once thought, I'm interested that, like with the James Webb Telescope, I'm very interested to see what that will learn about exoplanets, and maybe we will find somebody.
Yeah. If you find them first, please give me a call.
I will. Well, you have to do a sequel on your book.
Okay. You're right. I do. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Sarah, this was a lot of fun. If people want to learn more about you or your work, where can they go?
I have a website where there's more information about books and articles I've written, which is just sarahscoles.com, SCOLES. And then I am on Twitter at Scoles Sarah. So both of those places are good places to keep up with whatever it is I do with my life.
Okay. And any future books in the hopper that you can tell us about?
I'm working on one right now that is tentatively titled Mass Defect, which is a physics term about atomic energy, and it's a book about the modern nuclear weapons complex and the scientists who work kind of both on designing nuclear weapons and on the fundamental physics behind how those weapons work. So,
Oh, interesting.
been running around to a lot of labs lately.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have you back on when that comes out.
Yeah, for sure. I will be there, and I will be there unless I start flying drones around the labs, and then I will probably get arrested and not write a book. So,
Okay.
yeah. But yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I find it a fascinating topic. Like I mentioned in the episode, I grew up a Star Trek kid and an X-Files kid, and UFOs interest me. I haven't found a whole lot of compelling evidence, but the concept interests me. The idea of entirely different life forms being elsewhere in the universe is interesting. So I kind of follow this space a little bit. And some of the things that we talked about in this episode, I encourage you to go do a little bit more research in the news. It's kind of been a developing story of sorts. Very recently, within the last couple of weeks, it's kind of come out that some of the people involved in this program weren't necessarily operating in an official capacity investigating UFOs. It was more of seems to have been more of kind of a part-time hobby or personal interest done in their spare time, which I think is kind of interesting, given kind of the narrative we've been operating on the last 5 years. So it's, as with many of my history topics on this show, a lot of times they're in the way past, and have been, there's been plenty of time for historians to bring in analysis. This topic, though, is relatively new and kind of blends with current events, so it's still developing. So it's kind of an interesting thing to take a look at if you're interested in UFO stuff. If you liked Sarah's book and what she had to say, and you want to pick up a copy of her book, there is a link to They Are Already Here down in the description of this episode in your podcast app. And then I'll be back in a couple weeks or so. I've already recorded a couple interviews, one with Dean Job, talking about the murderous Dr. Cream, a Victorian-era serial killer. And then another one, Eric J. Dolan, has come back on the podcast to talk about his latest book, Rebel Seas, Privateering in the American Revolution. So got some good stuff on the docket coming up. Going to be recording another episode here soon. I'm talking with David Hendy from the UK, who has written a good book on the BBC, A Century on the Air. So I'm excited to talk to him about that. So, summer is rolling along and finding a lot of good history to talk about. So I hope you're enjoying it. And as I said before, if you're not following me on social media, please reach out and connect. I would love to hear from you and would love to hear your feedback. All right. With that, I hope you have a great rest of the day. Take care, everyone.